Hey guys, tonight we begin with the rickety footsteps of a world where your morning alarm isn't a gentle chime, a vibrating phone, or even a rooster with a good sense of timing. It's a man. A man with lungs like a tuba, a tunic that hasn't seen soap since last harvest, and a voice trained to terrify livestock. You're lying on your straw stuffed mattress, half covered by a wool blanket that smells like goat and lost dreams, when suddenly, hear ye, by order of the Duke, and just like that, your soul leaves your body. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't live near the town square, you are the town square. Your tiny cottage, mud brick walls, thatched roof, single window, no glass, just a wooden shutter you're emotionally attached to, is located right on the main road. Why? Because it was cheap. And because in this part of the 14th century, real estate values were dictated by proximity to shouting. Your bed is more of a suggestion than a surface. It creaks when you breathe and pokes you when you shift. You'd love to blame the straw mattress, but it's mostly your spine. You pull the blanket over your head, but it's no match for the man outside yelling about a new law concerning the proper length of sausages. Yes, this is real. Message criers, or town criers, aren't just loud, they're state sponsored loud. Their job is to wander through the streets at ungodly hours, bellowing official decrees, court summons, lost pig alerts, and anything else the local lords think you should know, like tax hikes or how many lepers are currently loose near the bakery. The uniform? A long robe, a feathered hat if they're feeling spicy, and a bell they ring before shouting. Why the bell? Because apparently the human voice traveling uninvited through your dreams isn't jarring enough. It's the medieval version of a push notification, annoying, unavoidable, and rarely good news. You stumble to the window and shove the shutter open, squinting at the blur of colors and indignation outside. The crier is halfway down the road now, turning to shout at a cluster of chickens and your neighbor, who's pretending not to be home. All candles to be extinguished after midnight, under penalty of fine or shame. Your eyes narrow. This is the same crier who announced last week that the local bishop would personally bless any sheep that didn't wander. That message led to 12 sheep being marched into the chapel and one minor exorcism. You flop back onto the bed. It's not even sunrise. The sky is still a pale bruise, the kind of color that promises either morning or more shouting. Your blanket is damp, either from the dew or your own despair. You mutter something unprintable into your hay pillow. Now here's the thing. Criers aren't just a medieval quirk. Versions of them have existed in ancient Egypt, Rome, China, you name it. In some places, they were called heralds. In others, those guys who won't shut up. They existed because written news was useless in a world where most people couldn't read. Parchment was expensive, printing didn't exist yet, and ravens, while dramatic, had terrible accuracy. So instead, people paid a man to memorize messages and bellow them across town. It was a job that required stamina, vocal range, and a complete disregard for privacy. Sometimes they'd have a scroll to read from. Other times, they'd just wing it, which is how your village ended up accidentally observing Lent 3 weeks early one year, historians still argue whether these criers had standardized scripts or if they improvised based on memory and beer intake. One scholar swears they followed rigid routines. Another suggests they were more like medieval stand up comics with poor material and excellent projection. There's even a theory that criers deliberately misread unpopular decrees to avoid being pelted with turnips. What's undeniable is that they were effective. You can't unhear a man screaming about horse theft and venereal curses while standing outside your window in the rain. It sticks, like soot or regret. Back in your cottage, you've given up on more sleep. The rooster hasn't even started, and you're already sweating. Your room smells like feet and pickled cabbage, and outside, someone is arguing with the crier about last month's boil ban. You don't want to know. You shuffle over to the fire pit and relight the embers from last night's cooking attempt, which ended in tears and something resembling stew. You've got some leftover bread, stale, hard, mildly dangerous, and a bit of cheese that may be growing its own opinions. As you chew and sulk, the town crier rounds back again. Hear ye, the mayor's dog is missing. Responds to Lord Biscuit. Reward offered. You snort. Lord Biscuit once bit your foot. You hope he finds a nice fox to chase? And just as you settle into your breakfast despair, you hear it again. Another bell. Different pitch. Another crier? No, this one's the apprentice. They're training new criers now. Because shouting isn't just a job, it's a legacy. Your heart sinks. 2 criers. Double the shouting. No chance of sleep. You step outside and see them both, old and young, teacher and student, shouting in harmony like a Gregorian boy band of doom. And suddenly, you understand why the neighbor moved to the swamp last week. You used to mock him for it. Now, it just sounds peaceful. The sun finally rises over the rooftops. The shouting continues. And you, friend, are wide awake in a world that thinks volume equals value. Welcome to the loudest morning of your life. Your shutter creaks shut again with a grunt and a prayer. But soundproofing hasn't been invented yet. And if it had, it wouldn't be affordable for someone who owns exactly 1 bowl, 2 tunics, and a very opinionated chicken named Percival. The shouting still filters through, like a sermon you didn't sign up for and can't escape. You lie back down, close your eyes, and try to pretend that you're dreaming of ocean waves. But instead of seagulls, it's and hear ye, by royal order, all ducks to be counted this weekend. You groan. Percival cocks his head at you like it's your fault. And maybe it is. You chose to live here, in a town where information delivery is less gentle update and more unfiltered vocal warfare. Your home, like most in this era, isn't soundproof. It's not even weatherproof. The walls are daub and wattle, basically fancy mud with a twig problem. They hold heat, moisture, and noise equally well, which is to say, not at all. Every footstep on the road, every goat-related scuffle, every curse hurled at an apprentice blacksmith echoes through your life with theatrical clarity. There's a festival coming next week. You know this not because you read a flyer, flyers don't exist, but because the town crier has announced it 4 times a day for the past 3 days, growing steadily more theatrical with each shout. Last night he added a dance, with a ribbon. The ribbon was not necessary, and yet there it was, fluttering aggressively. You pull the blanket over your head again, as if wool can shield you from state-sponsored volume. It cannot. The idea of a quiet morning is laughable. There is no snooze button in the Middle Ages. The only snooze is the moment between when you collapse from exhaustion, and when someone yells, "Someone's goat's on fire," which actually happened last week. And yes, the goat is fine now, though deeply traumatized. Eventually, you accept your fate and sit up, legs dangling off the bed. The floor is cold. Not refreshing cool, but why is there frost inside? Kind of cold. You wiggle your toes, stretch your back, and try not to think about the draft coming from the crack near the doorframe. That crack has heard every Criers message for years now. It knows more about this town than the mayor. Here's a detail historians often gloss over. Medieval homes were sonic sieves. Noise poured through like soup through a wicker basket. No insulation, no glass, no double glazing. Just open space and shared air. If your neighbor sneezed, you said, "Bless you." If your neighbor fought with their spouse, you had opinions. If your neighbor sang in the bath, you either joined in or moved. And in the center of all that was the crier, bouncing sound off every available surface like an overly enthusiastic pinball. The job wasn't for the faint of voice. Town criers trained their vocal cords like athletes, bellowing into barrels to build resonance, drinking herbal teas to soothe their throats, avoiding dairy lest it gunk up the gears. They were professionals, and proud of it. They stood in the square with the posture of someone announcing the end of days, even if the message was barrels now taxed at half rate. Some were beloved, others feared. A few became infamous, like Bernard the Boisterous, who allegedly broke a church window with his declaration about fish tariffs, or Elsbeth the Echo, the only female crier in your region, whose voice could travel a full kilometer and still sound sarcastic. Your own town's crier is named Oswin. He's wiry, spry, and deeply suspicious of pauses. His motto might as well be, "Why say something once when you can say it thrice and wake the dead?" He walks by your house again. Attention, a measure of flour now equals a finger and a half. Do not guess or face penalties. You blink. Did did that make sense? You stand slowly, grabbing your outer tunic from the hook near the door. It's stiff with yesterday's sweat and faintly smells like fermented onions. You blame the market vendor who hugged you too warmly while sneaking an extra leak into your satchel. As you step outside, the air hits you like a firm slap from nature. The sky's pale gold, the kind that tries to be hopeful but fails because your ears are still ringing. A few neighbors are already sweeping their stoops, exchanging polite nods that mean, "Yes, we both heard that," without having to say it out loud. And just as you begin to accept the morning's volume as your personal cross to bear, the bell rings again. Different again. Higher. Sharper. It's the third crier, the regional one. You freeze. This one only shows up when something big is happening. A royal birth, a new tax, a nearby village being swallowed by wolves. Again, people poke their heads out like prairie dogs. The baker drops his tray. A dog howls. Someone farts and immediately blames the dog. And then, by decree of the count, all able-bodied persons to report for ditch digging this Sunday. Refusal is considered seditious. The entire street sighs in synchronized dread. Sunday was meant to be a resting day, a cheese day, a don't shout at me about soil day. But no, because someone decided yelling was the best way to manage civic duty. You retreat back inside. The walls do nothing to stop the murmurs, now rippling through the neighborhood. Plans must be rearranged. Cheese postponed. You sit, you exhale. You stare at Percival. He clucks once, judging. There's no peace, only announcements. You could move to the forest, yes, but that comes with wolves, mud, and no access to fermented onions. So instead, you endure. You learn to live with the soundscape of medieval life, one bellowed decree at a time. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow's news won't involve flower ditches or ducks, but it probably will. You haven't even finished your morning slab of bread when the shouting starts again, this time louder, longer, and with such theatrical emphasis that you briefly wonder if this is a performance or a breakdown. By command of Her Grace, the Countess, all citizens shall attend the Tuesday market with clean hands and coin ready. You blink, mouth half full of crusty barley disappointment. Did he just say coin ready? Are they checking pockets now? You shuffle toward the window again, because why not? Privacy isn't real, and you've already given up on the idea of a quiet morning. Outside, a small crowd has gathered: shoemakers, fish sellers, two nuns, and a very angry man holding a duck. Everyone's squinting toward the town square like it might spontaneously provide answers or a refund. This is what passes for a broadcast in your world. A man yelling news into the air like it's supposed to soak into your skin by osmosis. The crier continues, pacing like a preacher on market day. There shall be no haggling with weight, scales. The metal ones have been found treacherous. A pause. Also, cooked turnips may not be sold beside raw ones. You close the shutter again. So here's the deal. Criers don't wait for you to be ready. They don't time their messages between chores or during your mid morning existential crisis. They arrive when they arrive. And if you're halfway through bathing, or giving birth, or praying for forgiveness, too bad. They've got a message, and you're going to hear it. Historically, criers didn't just read royal proclamations, they were the news. Everything from the king's latest whims to which roads were closed for plague parades came straight from a man with a scroll and a grudge against silence. There were no reruns, no rewinds, no summaries. If you missed it, tough. Ask your neighbor. Hope they weren't drunk or hard of hearing or prone to embellishing. And that's how you ended up attending a festival 3 weeks early once, because Gary swore he heard Midsummer Revelry begins tomorrow. Spoiler, it didn't. You danced alone, in a costume, while everyone stared. Even the livestock looked concerned. The town criers operated on their own schedule. Some did morning rounds, others preferred shouting just before dusk. A few, like Oswin, seemed to follow no logic at all, just whatever time they finished their third mug of weak ale and remembered they had a job. And once the bell rang, all bets were off. No one could ignore them. They had authority, backed by church or crown. If they declared a tax, you paid it. If they announced a curfew, you followed it. And if they yelled that ducks were now royal property, well, you kissed Percival goodbye and hoped he adjusted to life at court. Criers didn't just deliver facts. They brought fear, confusion, and the unmistakable aura of, oh no, not again. You remember one infamous day last winter. It was snowing. The sky was gray, and your chimney had just belched out its usual mix of smoke and bird feathers. You were enjoying a rare moment of warmth when, by order of the abbot, all hats must be blessed before entering the monastery. The confusion, the chaos, the poor hatmaker who accidentally blessed his own foot. For weeks, everyone walked around with slightly damp hats and paranoid expressions. Historians still argue whether that decree was even real. Some claim it was a mistranslation of hide must be pressed, referring to parchment. Others think Oswin just got cold and wanted attention. But here's the problem. No one questions the crier. You don't get to say, "Excuse me, could you clarify that bit about communal sausages?" You nod. You obey. You hope they don't yell again. Even if you're halfway through milking a cow, they don't care. They'll shout over your bucket. They'll stand outside your door mid prayer. They'll appear during weddings, funerals, and occasionally moments of intense personal embarrassment. You've heard of a town where a crier interrupted a marriage ceremony to announce a change in cabbage pricing. The bride wept. The groom reconsidered everything. And if you're not home when they pass, well, then it's up to someone else to relay the message, which often leads to reinterpretation. Case in point, two villages once declared war on each other because someone thought wheat storage rotation meant wheat seizure retaliation. 5 men were injured. One goose was elected mayor in the confusion. So you learn to listen, whether you like it or not. This morning, a new decree echoes down the street, bouncing off the cobblestones like a sarcastic ghost. All citizens are to salute the statue of Duke Merrill on passing. No exceptions. You stare at the statue. Duke Merrill's been dead for 87 years and is mostly pigeon territory now. Still, you nod gravely when you pass him, just in case. You're not alone in this ritual. Everyone plays the game, some with enthusiasm, others with resignation. The town elders grumble. The children giggle. One boy salutes with 2 fingers and a smirk. He'll learn the hard way, because message criers make things real. Until they shout it, it's gossip. After they shout it, it's law. And you don't get to ask questions. You just adjust your hat, salute the pigeon throne, and hope tomorrow's news doesn't involve plague rats, well regulations, or another change to candle curfews. Or worse, another duck census. You're just starting to wonder whether saluting a statue counts as cardio when Oswin returns, again, like a particularly persistent raccoon in human form. He clears his throat, raises the scroll, and with the solemnity of someone announcing the end of days, belts out, henceforth all chickens found roosting in barrels shall be considered contraband. A pause. Then quieter. Repeat, violators will be fined. 1 silver and a feather. You make eye contact with your neighbor across the alley. You both nod deeply. You both have absolutely no idea what that means, but you file it away, just in case your dinner plans involve illegal poultry. This is what surviving a world of message criers actually feels like. Every day is a mystery box of public proclamations, half-legible laws, and tone-deaf decrees delivered with maximum volume and minimal clarity. There's no Twitter thread for clarification, no footnotes, no Q&A session after. Just one man, one scroll, and one lungful of chaotic authority. Historians still argue whether criers were considered trustworthy officials or just glorified rumor delivery boys with vocal cords made of brass. Some had official uniforms and seals from the local baron or bishop. Others like Oswin seem to have made it up as they went along. Whether that scroll he holds is from the local magistrate or copied from a fish wrapper, no one knows. But you nod, because not nodding might get you taxed. And even the nodding is exhausting. You see, being on the receiving end of message criers requires constant vigilance. You've become fluent in interpreting tone. If Oswin bellows with a certain flair, it means something important. If he yells while waving his arms, it's probably a new curfew. If he squints at the scroll and mutters, it's either a tax update or he's trying to read a wine stain. You start learning how to read his body language like it's the stock market. One twitch of the eyebrow, panic. Two taps of his left boot, someone important died, or worse, arrived. And then there are the voice cracks. If Oswin's voice breaks mid announcement, it means the scroll is long. Long scrolls mean new rules. New rules mean more things to remember. And memory, unfortunately, is not your strongest feature, especially when half your brain is focused on remembering which side of the street the non haunted well is. Yes, the haunted well is still a thing. Criers didn't just announce laws, they managed everything from lost property to upcoming punishments. If someone dropped a pouch of silver, the crier would announce it. If someone was sentenced to public embarrassment for gross untidiness of footwear, that too would be shouted, loudly, repeatedly, while the accused stood there, red faced, adjusting their tragic sandals. And if you thought message criers were limited to the marketplace, think again. Some towns had criers that roamed, not in the charming ice cream truck kind of way, in the door to door, shout through your window kind of way. You could be mid nap, and suddenly, by order of the village council, Thursday is now pickle inspection. Day, you don't even own pickles, yet now you're anxious. You once knew a man who misheard public roasting of thieves as public toasting for leaves. He showed up with a wreath, a bottle of watered wine, and a deeply confused expression. He didn't stay long, but mishearings are common. You live in a world with poor acoustics and generous wind gusts. Echoes bounce down stone alleys like gossip on stilts, and criers don't wait for silence. They shout over cows, bells, weather, and each other. Once, two criers clashed in the same square. One announced a marriage, the other a quarantine. It was unclear whether guests were being invited or arrested. To survive this constant verbal assault, you develop techniques. You keep an ear out while tending to your chores. You take mental notes. You whisper remembered phrases to yourself like spells. Curfew changed. Pigs not allowed indoors. Chickens, barrels, something. You ask neighbors. Then you realize they heard something completely different. Now you have two versions of the truth. One says there's a parade next week. The other claims there's a tax on parades. You start keeping a notebook made of bark shavings just to scribble down these verbal missiles. Eventually, the notes become poetry. Chaotic, deeply concerning poetry. Bread must be flat or face the vat. Hats are taxed unless unstacked. Don't milk goats in council cloaks. You laugh. Then you remember these might be real laws. There is, however, one upside to this auditory chaos. No one ever accuses you of not knowing what's going on. You can't say, "Oh, I missed that decree," because someone will yell it again, probably Oswin, probably at midnight, probably outside your window while you're just trying to enjoy a nap on your bug infested straw mat. So you listen and you adapt, and slowly you become a message interpreter. You know how to filter the urgent from the absurd, the practical from the ceremonial. You can smell when a decree is just busy work, like the time Oswin shouted about an official fish grooming contest, and when it's actually important, like do not approach the miller's wife. She is contagious. Eventually, the criers become part of your day's rhythm. Like sunrise or rats. They shout, you flinch. You absorb, you flinch again. And still, the town marches on. But deep down, you wonder, is there a better way? Couldn't we just write this down somewhere permanent? Maybe hang it on a wall? Maybe invent a thing where you post news in one place and people just walk up and read it? You mention the idea to your friend. He stares blankly. Then he shrugs. But then who would wake us up at dawn to tell us about cheese taxes? You nod. Fair point. Because no matter how absurd, inconvenient, or just plain loud, you survive the criers. You duck, you nod, you remember, you endure. And when Oswin shouts, the council now recognizes left-handed swordsmen, you cheer. You don't know why, but it feels right. The shouting stopped, for now, but you know better than to relax. Because in this world, everyone's business is your business. And your business, well, it hasn't been your own since Oswin first took up the scroll and started broadcasting your bowel related blunders to the town square. You sit on your stoop, chewing on a chunk of what used to be bread, but now mostly resembles guilt in carbohydrate form, when another proclamation drifts down the alley like a mosquito with a megaphone. Let it be known that Martha, wife of George the Thatcher, is with child, and that George is not the father. Your eyebrows lift. You drop your bread. Percival cackles judgmentally. The people of your town are riveted. Windows open. Heads lean out. A man walking past with a wheelbarrow does a double take and whispers, "Well, that explains the haystack incident." And there it is again, the uncomfortable truth of pre-modern society. The line between public and private does not exist. Every whispered rumor, every misplaced sock, every unapproved goose transaction could become tomorrow's shouted headline. Criers don't just share laws, they're also the medieval version of a gossip column, crime blotter, and community Facebook group, all rolled into one and shouted at full volume, preferably while standing on a crate. The widow Edna has lost her teeth again. If found, return to the well. You've never met Edna. You never wanted to meet Edna's teeth. But now you are emotionally invested. This sort of broadcasting isn't accidental. It's systemic. In a world without literacy, paper trails, or even locked doors, verbal announcements are the glue that holds the social fabric together and occasionally sets it on fire. Everyone learns everything at the same time, whether they want to or not. You know who's sick, who's getting married, who's being punished, who was caught with someone else's pig, and yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. There is no privacy, only proximity. And because criers are seen as impartial mouthpieces of the state, or at least the loudest guy in town, their words carry the weight of truth. Even when it's very clear, Oswin is enjoying the drama, just a bit too much. Historians still debate the exact scope of what criers were meant to announce. Was there an official list of topics? Did they have boundaries? Or did they just fill the gaps between royal decrees with whatever juicy tidbits floated their way over ale and stew? There's one record from a port town where the town crier announced not only the time of low tide, but also the mayor's toe fungus. Interpret that as you will. Of course, this level of communal transparency comes with side effects. You no longer trust whispers. You flinch at scrolls. And if someone so much as clears their throat while holding parchment, your blood pressure spikes. Once, a visitor from another village tried to keep his engagement a secret. Oswin found out within a day. The next morning, be it proclaimed that Jonas of Greyfield has promised himself to Margaret the Weaver, despite her ongoing feud with the baker. You didn't even know about the baker feud. Now it's part of your internal lore. The couple moved away the next week, probably to a quieter village, one with a crier who only announces rain. Even criminal accusations are public spectacles. When someone steals a chicken, or say 8 chickens and a wheelbarrow, there's no quiet investigation. There's just Oswin yelling, Jed the stable boy is accused of felonious feather fraud. Trial at dusk. Bring chairs. It's not just legal, it's entertainment. People show up with snacks. Kids cheer. Someone brings a lute. The accused sometimes gives a dramatic monologue just for the spectacle. And if found guilty, the punishment is also announced loudly with flair. Jed is to spend 2 days in the stocks, dressed as a very confused pigeon. You don't even blink anymore. That's just Tuesday. There's no real way to escape it. You try tuning it out, but the voice penetrates walls, roofs, and most of your coping mechanisms. You try hiding in the woods. That works until the traveling crier finds you. Yes, traveling criers, mobile, shouting units on 2 legs, sometimes on horseback, sometimes in carts, yelling at multiple villages in a day like extremely aggressive tour guides. They show up just when you thought your secrets were safe. You had a friend, Mira, who once sneezed during a sacred reading ceremony. Someone told a crier. Next week, let it be known that Mira, spinner of thread, interrupted a reading with nasal disrespect. She changed her name, moved to the coast, swore off scrolls. You sigh. Your own name hasn't come up lately, which either means you're safe or the criers are saving the best for last. Because every time they shout someone's business, you know your turn is coming. Your debt, your lost bet on duck racing, your brief, ill advised affair with someone who turned out to be a visiting priest in disguise, it'll all come out with bell, breath, and bad poetry. But strangely, this open book culture also means people are a little more forgiving. They know your flaws, you know theirs, and no one pretends to be perfect because Oswin will remind you daily that you're not. It's oddly bonding. You catch someone's eye during a proclamation about shared bathwater, and you both just nod. Been there. Heard that. You laugh when someone's love letter gets read aloud because it happened to you last month. To my sweet Letta, your hair is like the wheat, your breath like unfortunate turnips. Not your finest metaphor, but memorable. And maybe, just maybe, in this messy, shouty world, the lack of privacy creates a strange kind of honesty. No filters, no secrets, just people, flawed and loud, trying to survive under the weight of scrolls and scandal. So when Oswin strides past again, bellowing, be it known that Barnaby the Miller has invented a new method of flour storage involving pig bladders. Proceed with caution. You chuckle. You raise your cup. You toast to Barnaby and his questionable innovation. Because in a town where everyone's story is broadcast at full volume, you might as well enjoy the show. You're starting to accept that if news isn't shouted into your face by a man in a hat, it doesn't exist. This morning confirms it. You hear someone mutter in the square, "Did you hear they raised the oat tax?" Another replies, "Nonsense. Oswin hasn't yelled it yet." And that really says everything. In this world, if no one yells it in public, it's not real, not binding, not worth paying attention to. Scrolls can be forged, rumors can be whispered, but a man with a bell and a voice that can peel paint, that's legitimate. And Oswin knows it. You watch him march to his usual shouting perch, a barrel near the well, worn smooth by years of boot prints and righteous stomping. He unfurls his scroll with the elegance of a squirrel with performance anxiety, clears his throat like it owes him money, and proclaims, by official decree, Those who fail to greet the mayor's horse shall be fined and educated. You raise an eyebrow. Educated? That's new. But no one questions it. Why would they? If Oswin shouts it, it's the law. Doesn't matter if it's about road tolls or horse etiquette. His voice has become gospel. You nod solemnly. Next time you pass the horse, who looks equally confused. This whole situation stems from one simple truth. Very few people can read. Writing exists, of course, but it's mostly the domain of monks, nobles, and that one guy in the back of the tavern who claims to write poetry, but always ends up drawing questionable cats. So laws and proclamations must be heard to be known, and because sound is fleeting, it must be repeated, loudly, often, with dramatic pauses. Sometimes criers have to deliver the same message 4 or 5 times a day, once at sunrise, once at noon, once after supper, once when someone reminds them they forgot to mention the important bit about the goats. You've started noticing patterns. If Oswin begins with by royal decree, it's serious. If he says, by strong suggestion of the Blacksmiths Association, it's something ridiculous. Like last week, all anvils must now be blessed before use. The blacksmiths claimed it reduced tool breakage. The priest claimed it increased tithing. You claimed your ears were tired. There's an almost sacred rhythm to it all. Bell, scroll, shout, confused murmur, repeat. That's how things become official. If someone finds a lost dog, Oswin shouts it. If the bishop is retiring, Oswin sings it. If the local eel supplier is caught price gouging, Oswin reenacts the crime using interpretive gestures and an eel puppet. Yes, that happened. You're not even surprised anymore. The idea that a man yelling makes something real may sound absurd from a modern point of view. But think about it. Even today, don't we believe things more when we hear them? A whispered rumor in a hallway still spreads faster than an official memo. A viral video outruns a research paper. Volume, drama, presence, they've always carried weight. Historians still debate whether criers were originally religious figures, minor nobles, or just folks with above average lung capacity and no fear of public speaking. Some say they were part of the judicial system. Others think they evolved from traveling bards who ran out of stories and took up government contracts. Regardless, they were necessary. In times of plague, war, famine, or festival, the crier was the only way to reach everyone at once. One scroll, one voice, one village. And for larger towns, they multiplied, each with their own territory, own audience, own level of theatrical flair. You once visited a town where the crier wore a costume, not just robes, a full golden tunic, feathered cape, and what can only be described as shouting shoes. They squeaked, on purpose. Their announcements came with flourishes, dramatic gasps, and at least one dance move. It was mesmerizing and completely exhausting. Aswin doesn't dance, but he has presence. He once shouted so forcefully during a tax proclamation that a hen laid an egg in fear. He apologized to the hen. This authority, this theatricality, is what makes the announcement stick. Because if someone quietly murmurs, "There's a curfew tonight," it'll be forgotten before dusk. But if Oswin bellows, "All lanterns to be doused at the seventh bell," or "Face the wrath of flame," Inspector Balthazar, well, you remember that. You even double check your candles. And so the system endures. No written confirmation. No appeals process. Just shouted law and shouted order. Your understanding of reality is, quite literally, shaped by whatever Oswin says before lunch. This system, absurd as it seems, also allows for some creative governance. If a rule is unpopular, just stop shouting it. No need for repeal, just let it fade. If a mistake is made, rephrase it in the next proclamation. By clerical oversight, the ban on laughter shall now be considered a misunderstanding. And if someone questions a decree, you look at them with the full weight of medieval wisdom and say, did Oswin shout it? If yes, unquestionable. If no, irrelevant. You start to measure time by the Criers' rounds. Breakfast before the flour tax. Lunch after the sanitation notice. Sleep following quiet hour, which ironically begins with Oswin shouting, quiet hour begins now. It's not perfect, but it works, sort of. The announcements are consistent, even if their contents are not. The volume is reliable. The accuracy, well, that's another matter. Remember the goose census incident? Oswin accidentally read the same line twice, resulted in double fines, a minor revolt, and a goose-led parade in protest. But he adjusted. He shouted again the next day. Error recognized. Geese may resume normal activities. You cheered, not because you care about geese, but because it felt good to know that even in this chaotic mess of noise and noise-based law, the system could bend just a little. So when you hear Oswin again, voice echoing across rooftops, proclaiming, be it declared, the North Gate is closed on account of sneezing guards, all traffic to the South Gate. You nod. You change course. Because now, it's real. You know what's louder than a crier? A crier in the rain. Because the wetter they get, the angrier they sound. And the angrier they sound, the more syllables they put into a single word. You're standing under your porch's crooked overhang, more philosophy than shelter, watching Oswin stomp through puddles with his usual flair, cloak plastered to his back, hat dripping rhythmically onto his scroll. He rings the bell. You wince. Water sloshes from it like it's been baptized in chaos. By command of the High Council, all cabbage stalls shall be moved to higher ground due to flooding. He wheezes. The rain makes him sound like a boiling kettle of rage and regrets. And here's the thing. The news doesn't stop just because the weather gets moody. In fact, the worse the conditions, the more vital the proclamations become. Because disasters, as you've come to understand, rarely come with advance notice. Unless you count Oswin dramatically coughing in the background as a sort of ominous foreshadowing. It doesn't matter if it's sleet, hail, scorching sun, or winds that carry goats off rooftops. If the Duke has thoughts, those thoughts must be shouted, and fast. The weather is just the world's background, noise, and criers must compete. Historians still debate whether criers received hazard pay for shouting during tempests. Some think they got a second ladle of stew. Others claim they were simply too afraid of the scribes' guilds to complain. Either way, they braved conditions that would make most people burrow into a haystack and never come out. You've heard stories. Criers who delivered flood warnings while standing knee-deep in mud. One who shouted about a locust invasion while actively being pelted with them. Another, possibly apocryphal, who declared a fire ban while his cloak was on fire. In some places, criers were issued special bells for inclement weather, larger, brassier, more resonant, designed to cut through the thunder like a sword of sound. You've never seen Oswin with one, but you suspect he wants it. He's the type to treat a hurricane as an opportunity to project even further. You remember one particularly unfortunate storm last spring. The river had decided it no longer liked staying in its banks and was now applying for dual citizenship across town. Oswin, true to form, rolled up his scroll, stuffed it under his tunic, and marched into ankle deep soup to deliver the news. Attention! All bread to be kept above the waist. You still don't know what that meant, but you complied, just in case. There's something absurdly inspiring about the dedication. Message criers didn't just brave weather, they conquered it by sheer vocal willpower. The louder the storm, the deeper their inhale. And the people? They responded accordingly. No matter how wet, tired, or skeptical, everyone paused. Everyone listened. Because they knew if someone was willing to yell at the sky, you probably ought to hear what they had to say. Sometimes criers used the weather to add drama. A thunderclap mid decree, perfect punctuation. Lightning, great for ominous tax increases. Fog, excellent atmosphere for crime statistics and witch warnings. It becomes part of the theater. You once watched Oswin announce the new composting schedule while gale force winds tried to unbutton his dignity. His scroll flapped, his words wobbled, but he persisted. And now it's a story people still tell. Remember Compost Gale? Someone chuckles near the well. Oh, aye, says another. He shouted compost so hard, I thought my teeth would grow carrots. Even seasonal changes didn't slow the shouting. In winter, criers added foot stomping and mitten waving for emphasis. In summer, they sweat through their robes while announcing water restrictions and sandal safety guidelines. You shiver slightly. The rain is soaking through your tunic, and Oswin hasn't stopped. Market hours shifted. Now open at midday. Bring your own stool. You sigh. You just bought a new stool. But it's wet now. Everything is wet, including your soul. But the job goes on, and it's not just Oswin. In nearby villages, criers use drums instead of bells. Others shout from bell towers. Some use assistants to echo announcements down long roads like a very determined game of telephone. You heard of a coastal town where criers used horns during storms. Not the elegant kind. These were conch shells, blown by lung power and regret, followed by announcements shouted over crashing waves. By order of the dockmaster, all boats must now be tied with double knots. Again, practical, urgent, ridiculous. But it works. Somehow, through rain and wind and inexplicable air-based goat migration, the news gets through, and it must. Because in a world without apps, radios, or even trustworthy pigeons, the voice is all you have. You wonder briefly, what would happen if criers did stop during bad weather? Probably chaos. Bread left unguarded. Floods unannounced. Cabbages drowned in low places. No, the shouting must continue, even if it sounds like gargling gravel, even if Oswin's scroll now resembles lasagna. You go back inside, towel off with a cloth that used to be beige, and reheat your breakfast stew. It tastes like wet regret. From your damp window, you hear Oswin's final morning blast. By direction of the Countess, all soap reserves to be stored in dry locations. Too late for that, you think, staring at the half-melted soap by your hearth. Still, you nod. You accept. You carry on. Because surviving message criers without modern help means accepting that weather is not an excuse. If the sky's falling, someone needs to tell you how deep the mud is and whether the mayor's horse will still be attending the council picnic. It's market day again, which means two things: questionable radishes and even more shouting. But this time, the voice echoing down the street isn't Oswin's. It's thinner, breathier, slightly panicked. Hear ye, hear ye. Someone has misplaced a sheep. Name of Martin responds to song. You peek out your window, and there he is, a younger lad, probably 14, wrapped in a Crier's robe that's clearly 2 sizes too large, holding a bell that looks more like it's ringing him. His name is Cedric. He's Oswin's apprentice, and he's having a day. You watch him try to pronounce ecclesiastical, fail twice, and then skip it entirely. Welcome to the world of repeaters and runners, the human information network that covers everywhere Criers can't be. Because as much as Oswin would love to be in 5 places at once, he's only got 1 pair of lungs and 2 occasionally frostbitten feet. So the system, such as it is, relies on a cast of messengers with varying levels of competence and deodorant access. Cedric is one of the better ones. He at least tries. He rings his bell, shouts his scroll, and only occasionally gets distracted by ducks. Others, less reliable. You've met runners who confuse Plague Watch with Pie Sale. One who thought banished meant brunch invited. Another who delivered news to the wrong village entirely, resulting in a 3-day wine festival that no one remembers, but everyone regrets. But you can't blame them entirely. It's a tough gig. Imagine, you're given a scroll, a direction, somewhere northeast of the Goat Bog, and the instruction to deliver a message word for word, through mud, hills, territorial geese, and the occasional bandit. By the time you arrive, your shoes are crying, your lungs are on strike, and your memory of the scroll has been replaced with angry poetry. Still, the town depends on you, because in remote areas, runners are the crier. If a storm hits, if a lord dies, if a cow gives birth to twins, again, someone has to spread the word. And not everyone lives within earshot of Oswin's operatic wrath. This web of runners creates a kind of organic, living information chain. One person shouts it in the next hamlet. Another hears it while collecting firewood. A third repeats it while passing through on a turnip cart. And so the news moves, village by village, like a very sweaty whisper. Historians still argue whether this runner system was formalized or just something that evolved, because people hate not knowing why their taxes suddenly doubled. Some towns had designated message posts, stones where runners would stop, shout, and maybe nap under a hedge. Others used church bells to signal an incoming messenger. A long toll meant royal decree. A short toll meant wedding. Rapid panicked ringing meant fire, or feral goose again. You remember one such runner, Tomas. He was famous for being fast, vague, and dramatically sweaty. He once arrived in your village mid-blizzard, announced, "The grain is coming," and passed out on a pig. It turned out he meant grain tax collector. But the damage was done. Everyone built celebratory bread sculptures. Of course, with any relay system, distortion is inevitable. You once heard that the king's nephew had declared a feast. By the time the message reached your village, it became, "The king is deceased, and there shall be feasting." Mourning turned into merriment, then confusion, then more feasting, just to be safe. You've learned to treat any second-hand proclamation with suspicion. If you didn't hear it shouted from a scroll by someone with a bell and a flair for dramatics, it's probably 40% wrong and 60% goat. Which is why the runners started wearing tokens, small wooden badges, seals, or official ribbons to prove they were trusted messengers. Some even carried scented satchels to signal their legitimacy. Lavender meant news, rosemary meant warnings, mint meant don't shoot, I'm not a bandit. Cedric, despite being new, takes his job seriously. He shouts each decree with full voice, even if he doesn't understand them, by order of the council. All wheat to be stored in dry barrels. Wet barrels are discouraged. He nods firmly, as if to say, "I don't know what this means, but I respect it." You respect it too, the effort at least. And it's not just verbal shouting. Some runners sing the messages. Others recite them like riddles or rhymes to help them remember. 5 days hence, by moonlight dim, all roads shall close from limb to limb. The Duke rides through with feathered plume, so hide your goats, give him room. Not exactly Shakespeare, but it sticks. The best runners are part poet, part acrobat, part gossip. They deliver the message, dodge the tomatoes, and disappear into the mist like government funded phantoms. The worst? They get distracted by ale, embellish the details, and spark minor uprisings over misheard cheese regulations. Still, the village tolerates them, because what else are you going to do? Invent a telegraph? Send smoke signals that say don't eat the fish? You rely on these runners. You learn their faces, their ticks, their tells. If Cedric scratches his ear, it means don't panic. If he mutters before the bell, it means this is probably about manure. If he sprints while laughing, it's either very good news or a prank. And as the day fades, Cedric delivers his final message. All candles to be colored blue for festival, and no more chickens near the maypole. You smile. You didn't know there'd be a festival, but now, thanks to one eager, muddy boy and his commitment to yelling in puddles, you'll be there with blue candles and a chicken free perimeter. Because in a world without emails, alerts, or reliable memory, you survive with the help of runners. Those breathless, bug bitten, bell wielding messengers of chaos and community. And sometimes they even bring the sheep home. You knew it was coming. You just didn't know it would be you. The scroll is in your hands. The bell is heavy. And the expression on Oswin's face when he said, "It's your turn," was far too gleeful for comfort, because today you're the one repeating the message across fields, across fences, across cow pastures full of indifferent cows, and one rooster who seems personally offended by your voice. It all started when Oswin declared he had a sore throat. Too much bell ringing in the fog, or perhaps divine punishment for the bread storage in socks decree last week. Either way, he handed you the scroll, shoved a bell in your hands, and muttered, "Field duty, outskirts. Don't mess it up." You nodded, too stunned to protest. And now here you are, stomping through mud, with your tunic tucked into your socks and your pride somewhere behind you near that suspicious puddle. By order of the council, you begin, with all the authority of a sheep with stage fright. All trough water is to be boiled before use. Nothing, not a soul in sight. Well, except for 3 cows, and they don't seem impressed. Still, you try again, louder. Trough water, boil it, or else. The cows blink. One snorts, close enough. This is the life of a rural message repeater. Part crier, part hiker, part target for bird droppings. You trudge across uneven paths, past mossy stone walls, toward lonely cottages tucked behind willow trees. You knock. You shout. You try not to mix up the messages. The thing is, it's not just about yelling, it's about connecting. You're the bridge between central shouting and forgotten huts. You're the reason old Ewan, who hasn't left his chimney since midsummer, now knows the Duke is allergic to apricots. This may seem unnecessary, but rural folks matter. They're part of the system. They vote with their sheep and their shovels. And if you forget them, you might wake up to a manure protest on your front step. Back in town, Oswin's voice carries like thunder. But out here, it's just you, the scroll, and the wind. And you begin to appreciate the art of shouting across distance. You climb a knoll. You ring the bell. You cup your hands around your mouth and declare, "The tax on turnips shall be lifted until the next full moon. You hear a faint cheer. Somewhere across the hill, a farmer raises his arms. A pig squeals in agreement. Historians still debate how accurate these repeaters were. Some say they had remarkable memory and near poetic recall. Others suggest they occasionally improvised. Like that time someone heard, "No goats allowed in the chapel," and turned it into, "Goats must now be baptized weekly." Goat church attendance skyrocketed, moral clarity did not. But there's something deeply human about the whole process. The idea that news is hand carried, voice lifted, and ear delivered, that your only tool is your own breath, and your only confirmation is a nod from someone boiling cabbage. You find a cottage nestled near a stream. An old woman opens the door, eyes squinting. "What's the shouting today?" she asks, like she's ordering soup. You consult the scroll. All beehives must be moved 10 paces south. Bees are upset. She nods, mutters, "Well, aren't we all?" and closes the door. And you move on. There are no likes, no shares, no echo chambers here, just physical effort and communal knowledge. If you want someone to know something, you walk it to them. You speak it to their face. You endure the walk, the mud, the sheep attacks. You earn your message. You pause to rest near a stone wall. You chew a bit of bread. You stare at your bell like it's plotting against you. And suddenly, you remember something Oswin once said between sips of soup and complaints about ungrateful listeners. He said, "It's not about shouting. It's about making people feel they're part of something, that they're not forgotten, even if they live near 3 trees and a ghost mill." You didn't get it then, you do now. You ring the bell one more time, throat hoarse, arms sore. The mayor declares Thursday to be string sorting day. Celebrate responsibly. You're not even sure what that means anymore, but you say it because someone, somewhere, might need to hear it. You head home as the sun dips below the fields. You're covered in mud. Your boots squelch, and your scroll has developed a mysterious stain. But you've done it. You've delivered the word. The cows may not thank you. The people may not remember you. But they heard you. And in a world without phones, radios, or flying messenger owls, which, yes, someone once tried disastrously, that's all that matters. You return to town, legs sore and throat dry, ready to collapse into something vaguely resembling a bed. But instead, you arrive just in time to witness what appears to be a small riot. There's shouting, more shouting, bread being thrown, which is serious business around here. Aswin's back in action, standing atop his favorite barrel, waving his scroll like a sword and trying to restore order with the only tool he trusts, more shouting. Citizens, remain calm. The king did not say, "Bring bats to church." He said, "Bring banners to search." Someone throws a turnip. It misses. Ah, yes. Mistranslations. The Criers' worst enemy, and the town's favorite chaos generator. Turns out the original message had traveled from the capital via 4 criers and one confused monk. Somewhere along the chain, the royal announcement about an upcoming pageant became a terrifying rumor about a nocturnal animal cult. This isn't the first time. Historians still argue whether the infamous bread rebellion was about increased wheat taxes or a misheard ban on braids with crusts. Either way, it led to the Great Sourdough Uprising of '98. That year's motto, "You can take our lives, but you'll never take our baguettes." It's the natural result of an all-verbal communication system. Words morph, messages twist, add in weather, dialects, strong ale, and a general distrust of vowels, and you've got a recipe for delightful disaster. And it doesn't take much. One word wrong, and you've got mayhem. Once a messenger shouted, "The Duke is arriving," and someone heard, "The plague is thriving." By sundown, the tavern was barricaded, and people were flinging herbs at one another like holy water. You overhear someone in the crowd now whisper, "Wait, so there isn't a bat inspection?" Oswin is now red in the face, shouting in all directions, "What there shall be no inspections of bats, badgers, or any other creatures beginning with B." Someone mutters, "Typical. Bias against badgers again." You step back and let the moment pass. But it's clear now. The message is only as strong as the listener's ears. Repeaters, criers, runners. They're all working off memory and mud-stained scrolls. And if one of them misreads a curl in the parchment, suddenly, mandatory bridge repairs becomes mandatory beard repairs. And the local barber has a line out the door. In villages like yours, where few can read and even fewer admit it, people rely entirely on verbal accuracy, which makes clarity more valuable than gold. Some criers adapt. Oswin, for example, has started incorporating props. When he announces a wheat tax, he holds up a sack of grain. When he proclaims a curfew, he points dramatically to the sun and then to his own eyes. Occasionally, he mimes things, with mixed results. "All lamps must be covered by dusk," he'll shout, while holding up a blanket and shaking it over a stick. Once, he tried to mime oxen registration. It looked like aggressive yoga, but still, better than the alternative. You recall the time when the Duke's proclamation about new fishing regulations was shortened by a lazy runner to just "fish are forbidden." The villagers went mad. They wept. They mourned. One man released all the eels from his cellar in protest. The eels did not appreciate this gesture. Neither did the cobbler who slipped on one. Eventually, the real message arrived. Turns out only fishing nets of a certain length were being regulated. Fish were still legal. Eels were still slippery. But by then, the damage was done. There's even a kind of folklore now around misheard proclamations. People share them like bedtime stories. Did you hear about the town where someone mistook fruit tax for fugitive attack? Oh, aye. My uncle once built a moat because someone yelled, "The bridge is out," when they meant "the brewer is about." It becomes part of the culture. And honestly, it's hard to blame anyone. Try standing in a cobblestone square with 50 shouting merchants, 3 goats in heat, 2 rival lute players, and 1 overexcited child banging a pot. Now add Oswin, projecting his entire being into the air like a man possessed, and ask anyone to remember exactly what he said. It's a miracle you remember your own name some days, but amidst all this miscommunication, something amazing happens. The town learns to correct itself. Aswin may start the message, but the people finish it. They compare notes. They argue details. They reenact the phrasing. A blacksmith swears it was banners, not bats. The baker insists there was a reference to cheese. A local child says, "I just like the part where someone shouted for glory." And gradually, the true message emerges, not because of perfect delivery, but because of community filtration. The people adjust. They adapt. Sure, they might hold a second mini rebellion just in case, but eventually they get there. And so, when the riot dies down, and Oswin finally sits down with a damp scroll and a mug of something steaming, he sighs and mutters, "Next time, I'll just draw it." You think he's joking. You hope he's joking, but part of you wants medieval pictograms. Anything to avoid another bat incident. As you walk home, you hear someone whistling the news, not shouting it, just softly, tunefully whispering the day's decree like it's a lullaby. Boil the trough, move the hives, don't bring badgers into lives. You smile. Because even when the message goes sideways, somehow, it still gets through. You're just settling in, finally, after the Bat Badger banner debacle, when a new announcement slices through the early evening air. This time, Oswin's voice has that sharp, clipped edge. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just grim. Henceforth, let it be known, Jeremiah, son of Alden, is to receive 12 strikes for failure to deliver royal taxes. Strikes to be administered at mid morning, in public, and with regret. Ah, punishment by volume. You sigh. Not because Jeremiah is being punished, he's been forgetting taxes since the last harvest moon, but because now you have to hear about it loudly, 3 times, with echoes. Punishment in your town isn't a private matter, it's a performance, a necessary, uncomfortable, acoustically optimized spectacle. And it always starts with a crier, because in this society, the only thing worse than being punished is being punished quietly. If no one hears your shame, did you even suffer? This logic, flawed as it is, means that public shouting of offenses is as much a part of the sentence as the punishment itself, sometimes more so. You once saw a man whipped for stealing dried figs. Not ideal, certainly, but what stuck with you wasn't the flogging, it was Oswin's sing-song preamble. Let it be known that Bartholomew, lover of figs and bad decisions, did commit theft on the 17th day of the harvest moon, in the year of our Lord, under the shadow of a lantern, while witnessed by a pigeon. He said it 3 times, once before the punishment, once during, once after. The pigeon nodded solemnly each time. This kind of public spectacle isn't just about humiliation, it's about control. It reinforces the idea that law is not just written somewhere in a dusty monastery, but shouted, and therefore undeniable. The scroll becomes the script. The crier becomes the herald of doom. The punishment becomes theater. Historians still debate whether criers were chosen for their voices or their ability to enunciate humiliation. Some even had designated punishment scripts, pre-written flourishes like unrepentant knave, deceiver of hens, and wearer of poorly hemmed trousers. The punishment itself almost always accompanied by narration. First strike for the misplaced coins. Second strike for the lack of excuse. Third strike for the sigh you just gave. You once watched a man receive lashes for disrespecting the proclamation. All he'd done was blink too slowly. Criers also had the power to deliver sentences for lesser crimes on the spot. No trial, no paperwork, just Oswin, a scroll, and a mood. You saw it happen with young Tilda last winter. She accidentally knocked over a barrel of salted herring, and before the fish even stopped rolling, Oswin declared, Tilda of the East Street is sentenced to 2 days of barrel reassembly and 1 night of fishy reflection. To her credit, she leaned into the role. She even gave a speech. People applauded. It was honestly kind of moving, but not all were so lucky. Some punishments came with repeat performances. The crime would be shouted in the morning, again at noon, and once more at dusk, often in rhyme. You'd be mid-stew and suddenly hear, for the theft of bread, let it be said, the baker's wife doth wish him dead, so he shall scrub the streets in red. Just berries, not blood, no need for dread. Creative, rhythmic, horrifying. You start to wonder if the real punishment is having your worst moment broadcast to every goat, goose, and gossipy neighbor in earshot. Privacy? You forgot what that feels like. Even watching a punishment is mandatory. If you don't attend, you're questioned. If you look bored during the announcement, that's disrespecting the crown's breath or something equally vague. And sometimes the punishment is announcing your own punishment. That's right. If the crime is mild, but humiliating enough, you might be asked to stand on the crier's barrel and shout your offense aloud, 3 times, with volume and enunciation. Hello, I, Nigel, did take 3 tankards of mead from the tavern without payment. I am sorry, I was thirsty and bad at math. Nigel's voice cracked on mead. The tavern gave him free ale later, out of pity. These self announcements are reserved for local characters, people who can take a little public roasting and still walk to market the next day. You? You live in fear of becoming one of them. One day, you will forget to return your borrowed kettle, and Oswin will know, and the town will know, and the kettle will be referenced in rhyme. There's something ancient and primal about all this. The idea that shame must echo, that guilt must ring out, that justice is only real if people hear it. Punishment by volume isn't just about discipline, it's about memory. No one forgets what Jeremiah did. Not because the crime was massive, but because Oswin shouted it until pigeons blushed. And yet, there's mercy in the repetition too, because once it's been shouted, once it's been witnessed, once the punishment is done, it's over. The slate is clean. No one brings it up again. To dwell is to question the scroll, and that's frowned upon. So tomorrow, when Jeremiah limps to the bakery, no one will mention the tax thing. They'll nod. They'll move aside. They'll offer him a scone. The volume has absolved him. It's market day again. And just as you're considering whether bruised pears are worth 3 buttons and a secret, you hear Oswin, once more, clearing his throat like an aging rooster in a theater troupe. Hear ye, by request of the midwife. Pregnant women are advised to avoid garlic until further notice. You blink. So does everyone else. A nearby monk whispers, surely that's not official. Oswin bellows again, yes, this is an official notice. And just like that, the town accepts it. Garlic is cancelled. For now. Welcome to the strange and slippery world where the news includes rumors, hunches, suspicions, and the occasional dream Oswin had while napping near a cheese wheel. See, message criers might start with decrees and scrolls, but eventually they become, well, local influencers, walking podcasts, audible hearsay. And once you give someone a platform and a bell, things tend to drift. Historians still debate just how much of what criers shouted was sanctioned versus improvised. Some towns kept careful records, others didn't care, as long as the shouting was entertaining and vaguely useful. It was information, drama, and moral instruction, all in one foghorn package. You can always tell when Oswin has no new scrolls, because that's when he starts announcing opinions. Let it be known that the baker's new crust technique is deeply questionable, or personal grievances. And for the record, Oswin the crier did not steal that ladle. Check the chandler's basement. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not. Rumors become news, and news becomes reality by sheer repetition. You heard one yesterday. The blacksmith's dog can predict rain. Was it a joke, a warning, a prophecy? Doesn't matter. People are now checking the dog before hanging their laundry. Once someone accused the innkeeper of overwatering the mead. No evidence. But Oswin muttered it just loud enough during a coinage update, and by supper Three guests had demanded drier drinks. In a world where literacy is scarce and paper is precious, sound is authority. If it's shouted, it must be true. And criers? They're only human. Flawed, underfed humans with a captive audience. You suspect Oswin sometimes just wants to see what happens. A few weeks ago, he added this to a completely unrelated proclamation. Also, sandals in winter are officially unwise. No decree, no scroll, just common sense, shouted until it became local law. People stopped wearing sandals. The tanners sold out of boots. The cobblers celebrated. Oswin nodded to himself, like a man who had shaped the very fabric of society. This slippery slope means everything is fair game, especially gossip. When the butcher's daughter was spotted talking to the tanner's apprentice under the willow tree, Oswin simply announced, "The young shall mingle, but the willow still whispers." No names, no details, but everyone knew, everyone looked, and the couple fled to a village where trees are apparently less judgmental. You try to ignore these bits, but it's hard. They stick. You still remember that time he shouted, "The fishmonger says his herring now sing if left in sunlight. Further inquiries may be cursed." You've never bought herring since, and the line between rumor and decree gets blurrier every season. Sometimes it's superstition. New moon means no baking with nutmeg. Trust me. Sometimes it's weather prediction. The north wind carries sorrow. Maybe stay inside today. Sometimes it's just pure nonsense. Pigeons on the left roof signal a dispute between tailors. And the worst part? These fringe tidbits often work. People cancel weddings. They replant gardens. They avoid certain stools at the tavern, all because someone with a scroll, a bell, and booming lungs hinted at doom. But there's comfort in it too. These shouted fragments stitch the town together, like an audible tapestry of shared fears, jokes, and misremembered warnings. Everyone walks around slightly paranoid, slightly amused, slightly prepared for garlic-based disasters. And Oswin, he thrives. Some say criers used to be chosen because they were dramatic. Others believe the role made them that way. Either way, it's become his stage. One minute he's proclaiming tax adjustments. The next, he's quoting dreams. Last night, I dreamt of a field of cheese. I'm not saying it means anything, but still, be wary. You find yourself looking over your shoulder at dairy products, just in case. The town adjusts. A crier may say, "Avoid the river this week." Why? No reason, just a vibe, so people avoid it. And sure enough, the next day, a log drifts down covered in bees. Was it a prophecy? A lucky guess? Or just a rumor that became a blessing? Doesn't matter, because you listened and survived. You've learned that living with criers isn't about sorting fact from fiction. It's about interpreting tone. If Oswin yells with urgency, it's probably serious. If he draws and uses metaphors, questionable. If he clears his throat 7 times and mumbles, "This one's from an old dream I had during goat flu," just go inside and lock the doors. It's all part of surviving a world where shouting equals news. So when he strolls into the square today, scroll in one hand, apple in the other, and calls out, "Behold, the chandler claims to have invented moon-scented candles. Results pending. Smell at your own risk." You don't laugh, you don't question, you simply nod and make a mental note to avoid candles until next week. Because rumor or not, you're not taking chances on moon-scented combustion. It's the middle of the day, and you're finally sitting down for your one true luxury, the sacred, possibly imaginary nap. The kind where you pull your hood over your eyes, slump against a wall warmed by the sun, and dream of a world where nobody is yelling about pickles or plague policies. And then bell ring, loud throat clear, full lunged declaration from somewhere too close to your left ear. Let it be known, a cow named Edgar has escaped. He is not to be trusted. You jolt upright. Your heart taps out Morse code on your ribs. You've drooled on your sleeve. Somewhere behind you, someone giggles. You try to go back to sleep. You do. But Oswin, or maybe it's his overeager apprentice, Cedric, is making another round, now with additional enthusiasm and fewer punctuation marks. Edgar has been seen headed north. Report suspicious. Mooing immediately. Reward in turnips. So much for napping, because in this world, trying to nap through a crier is like trying to nap through a kazoo festival in a bell tower. And it's not just announcements. It's the echo chamber of a town that's never, ever quiet. Remember, criers don't have schedules. They have scrolls, lungs, and an unshakable belief that volume equals value. They appear at dawn, mid-morning, early afternoon, sunset, and sometimes just when you've managed to drift off. You tried once to nap behind the herb stall. Failed. Got startled awake by peasant. Caroline has found a tooth in her soup. No further questions. You've never looked at soup the same way again. Even your own house isn't safe. You once awoke from a midday nap thinking someone was attacking you, only to discover it was just Oswin projecting about chimney tax compliance directly into your chimney. You try to muffle it all. You stuff wool in your ears. You hide in a crate. You cover your face with the laundry. It doesn't help, because criers have a built-in radar for silence. If a neighborhood is too quiet, they increase volume. It's like some primal instinct. Oh, are people sleeping? Time to shout about hedgehog regulations. Historians still argue whether criers had nap-specific vendettas. No scrolls directly confirm it, but based on your lived experience, the answer is yes. You remember a week when Oswin was experimenting with musical delivery? Yes, singing the proclamations. You were dozing in the stable loft when you heard, by royal decree, please wash your feet if you wish to enter the bakery. You fell out of the loft. The donkey judged you silently. Even worse are the off-hour criers. These are the roaming criers who specialize in emergency updates. You're mid-nap, curled beside your dwindling fire, and suddenly, attention, the barrel by the well has exploded. No one approach until the splinters have been counted. You didn't even know barrels could explode. Now you know too much. You once suggested a quiet hour in the town square. Oswin laughed for a full minute, then shouted, "Let it be known, some citizens have requested quiet time. If only life were so simple." Everyone laughed. You scowled. The nap died. Even nightfall doesn't guarantee silence. Some criers take it upon themselves to repeat key notices for the benefit of the late shift insomniacs. As a reminder, candles are to be extinguished at the ninth bell. Failure to do so invites wraiths and fines. And then Cedric adds, hopefully, sleep well, citizens, unless the wraiths come. Thanks, Cedric. You've considered moving to a quieter village. But rumor has it, they have two criers. One for daytime, one for dreams. You stay. Instead, you adapt. You invent a new nap strategy. Micro-napping between proclamations. Oswin rings the bell. That's your timer. Shout ends? You have 17 to 23 minutes before the next scroll. You build a fort under your laundry table. You stuff your ears with lavender. You learn to drift off to the soothing lullaby of people mishearing announcements. What did he say? No singing near livestock? No, I think he said, bring string to the cook off. I'm bringing both. It's not ideal, but in a town where even dreams have a public announcement clause, you take what you can get. One day, in a rare moment of honesty, you ask Oswin, do you ever stop? He pauses. The scroll in his hand wilts slightly. He says, I once tried. A day of silence. No bell, no voice. People panicked. Thought the monarchy had fallen. A goose got elected mayor. Never again. Fair enough. So the next time you hear him shouting mid-siesta, the mayor requests that all radishes be grown with increased optimism. You simply turn over, smile into your sleeve, and mutter, good luck with that, radishes. And maybe, just maybe, you fall asleep again. Briefly, before someone starts shouting about emergency moose sightings. Because in this world, rest is rare, but at least it's never boring. You wake up to the sound of bells. Not Oswin's usual rhythmic clang of certainty, but a clumsy, offbeat ding-dong donk, like someone dropped a stew pot down a spiral staircase. You stumble outside, squinting into the morning mist, and there he is, Cedric. Again, he's wearing Oswin's hat, which is clearly too big, and holding a scroll upside down. Hear ye, all mutton shall be, weighed philosophically. You blink. He blinks. Somewhere, a cat sneezes. Welcome to Crier Training Day, also known as how towns accidentally spread nonsense, because criers don't live forever. Their scrolls fray, their knees creak, and their ability to shout without spitting on pedestrians slowly fades. So eventually, someone like Oswin has to pass the bell to someone like Cedric. And that is when things get particularly chaotic. See, the transition from apprentice to official crier isn't formal. There's no exam, no ceremony, no oath sworn on sacred megaphones. It just happens when the main crier catches the flu, gets called to a wedding in the next town, or decides it's finally time to nap for once in his life. And the town, well, it suffers. Today, Cedric has mistaken official guidelines on market sanitation for a recipe. Traders must bake their onions with soap. Gasps ripple through the crowd. A fishmonger drops his wares. A child starts crying. And you? You just sigh and grab your emergency earwool. Crier apprentices like Cedric are meant to learn by listening. But when your teacher is Oswin, a man who bellows with enough force to invert clouds, there's not much room to take notes. It's all noise, bravado, and vague gestures. Historians still argue whether criers were chosen by merit, family, or sheer lung power. Some say villages trained criers from birth, feeding them loud soups and forcing them to narrate goat bursts. Others believe it was simply a matter of who didn't run away fastest. Cedric, to his credit, tries hard. You once saw him in the alley behind the bakery, practicing intonation with a stick and an empty chamber pot. Attention! All biscuits shall be counted before consumption. He bowed to the wall. The wall said nothing, but you admired the effort. Still, mistakes happen. Just last week, he announced, by decree of the council, no one shall whistle after midnight or before grapes. Grapes? That wasn't even in the scroll. Turns out he dropped it in the wash basin. The ink smudged. His memory filled in the gaps with fruit. Oswin, when he heard, simply muttered, could be worse. He once replaced tax increase with snack release, caused a riot in the bakery, flour everywhere. Training criers often get too creative. You've heard Cedric recite proclamations in verse. You've heard him do accents. You've seen him attempt juggling while reading town ordinances on livestock hygiene. None of these were necessary. All of them were unforgettable. And townsfolk, they respond poorly. Some laugh, some panic, some take it as divine instruction. One man reportedly sold all his spoons after Cedric said, "Forks are now preferred by the Archbishop." That same man later tried to pay taxes in interpretive dance. No one stopped him, not even Oswin. But here's the thing, mistakes stick. Once something's been shouted, even incorrectly, people remember it. You still avoid the alley behind the mill because Cedric once proclaimed it was cursed with damp echoes. To this day, children dare each other to whisper into it and run. One of the cows won't go near it. Her name's Judith. She knows. So the town develops a system. When Cedric is shouting, people make a face, half listening, half bracing. A shrug means possibly true. A squint means wait, what? A head tilt means I'm going to do it anyway, just in case. You've adopted a strategy of gentle correction. You sidle up to Cedric after he's proclaimed all soap shall be worn at funerals, and whisper, think you meant all swords shall be drawn at funerals. You swapped lather for honor again. He thanks you profusely. You hand him a dry scroll. Eventually, the town begins to help. Elders shout corrections from windows. Children mime punctuation marks. The tanner's wife throws fruit at him when he gets too interpretive. It's community training, and Cedric slowly improves. He now shouts with confidence, if not accuracy. His bell rings on purpose, not just from gravity. He even wears Oswin's hat, with slightly less tragic slouch. Today, after the mutton philosophy incident, he clears his throat and tries again. By council request, all meat stalls must be inspected for cleanliness and display proper permits. Silence. Then applause. He bows, a little too deeply, knocks over a barrel. Still progress. Historians note that many criers began their careers in chaos and ended in reverence. They became symbols, not just of authority, but of community resilience. You may shout the wrong thing about garlic once or twice, but if you shout consistently, eventually you earn trust. It's not about perfection, it's about repetition, rhythm, and the belief that someone must yell, or else the world will forget itself. So you pat Cedric on the back. He drops the bell. You help him retrieve it. He nods in gratitude, then announces, also, the fountain is now for drinking only. No more bathtub incidents. That one's real, unfortunately. And as you walk away, you think, maybe someday Cedric will be the Oswin of tomorrow. Grumpy, wise, loud, feathered hat at a jaunty angle, yelling about turnips and truth with equal force. But for now, he's the apprentice, the future. The reason you still double check your soup for soap. It's a sleepy, sun-drenched afternoon, the kind where even the chickens look contemplative. And just as you settle onto a hay bale with ambitions of doing absolutely nothing, there it is again. Ding ding! Citizens of good standing, the baker will now be weighing biscuits to ensure moral integrity. You don't even flinch anymore. That's just Tuesday. In a society where almost anything can be declared official, if someone bellows it with confidence and just enough consonants. Because here's the odd truth you've come to accept. Once a message is shouted in public, loudly, and preferably with dramatic hand gestures, it becomes real. Maybe not legally binding, Maybe not morally relevant, but real in the only way that matters. People believe it, talk about it, and most importantly, act on it. This is how no carrots on Wednesdays became a genuine kitchen policy for three households. It started as a joke, a whispered dare. Then Cedric shouted it with too much flair. And now somehow, it's a rule. Unwritten, undocumented, unquestioned. It's the medieval version of going viral. Without the internet, without cameras, and without memes. Just volume and repetition. Historians refer to this as proclamatory ossification. The moment a shouted idea, no matter how silly, hardens into tradition. And the more times it's repeated, the deeper it roots. Once Oswin shouted, "Let it be known, the well near the beech tree is now reserved for left-handed people on Tuesdays." It was meant to be a sarcastic dig at the mayor's cousin who had complained about right-handed bucket bias. But the next week, lefties lined up dutifully, righties hesitated, and now the well has a chalk sign and a strict schedule. That's how power works in your village. Volume plus conviction, new reality. It's not that people want more rules. They just respect anyone who can deliver them while shouting above a sheep choir. You once watched Cedric declare, "By order of no one but myself, do not trust geese after sunset." People laughed. Then they stopped laughing because, well, the goose incident started. One girl lost a sandwich. One man claimed a goose stared into his soul. And just like that, sunset goose fear became part of local wisdom. Criers don't just announce law, they shape culture. You still use the phrase, "as sudden as a second bell," when things escalate quickly. Or, "he's gone full proclamation," when someone won't stop explaining their dinner plans. Even the town's flirting language has changed. "I'd shout your name in the square," someone coos, even if it wasn't on the scroll. You heard it. You cringed. You also kind of blushed. This performative declaration culture means every message carries social weight, not just legal meaning. Like the time someone declared, "The buttermaker's son is now courting the shepherd's niece. May the odds be ever in their flavor." Not official, not necessary. But now, half the town treats them like royalty. Someone embroidered them a banner. And of course, it cuts both ways. Missteps, when shouted, become legendary. You accidentally dropped a honeycomb once. Oswin saw. The next morning, let it be remembered, yesterday, at twilight, a citizen who shall remain honey sticky left a gift for the ants. To this day, people offer you fake beeswax as a joke, mostly. But it's not just gossip and goat warnings. This system also spreads real useful habits, because once a good idea is declared and accepted, it becomes woven into daily life. Stir porridge clockwise to avoid stomach misfortune. Never build a ladder on baking day. It annoys the spirits. Cool your soap near the window or face bubble rebellion. Silly? Possibly. But everyone remembers, and some of it's practical. Probably. Even festivals begin this way. The annual spoon chase started when Oswin dropped his lunch, then shouted mid-fumble, and thus begins the spoon trial. Children ran after it. Adults laughed. Now it's a whole day, with prizes. It only takes one declaration, shouted with intent, to spark a tradition. Sometimes you wonder if Oswin's experimenting. What if one day he shouts, "On Thursday, everyone must dance backward across the square to honor the invisible turnip god"? You wouldn't put it past him. You'd probably join in, just to be safe. Because no one wants to be the only one who ignores a shouted rule. That's how you end up ostracized. Or worse. mentioned in next week's proclamation. You heard of a woman in the next village who refused to participate in clean candle hour. Now, whenever someone leaves wax stains on the pew, they whisper, "She went full Elsbeth." Poor Elspeth, she just wanted to read. And so life becomes a constant balance, listening, interpreting, complying, but also watching closely to see if it's really official or just Oswin's latest poetry attempt. The safest strategy? Treat every proclamation like gospel until proven comedic. Unless, of course, it's Cedric declaring that worms are medieval currency now. You took that one with a pinch of skepticism and also a pinch of salt. For the worms, it's unclear. So when today's proclamation finishes with, "And all citizens shall smile more while using the latrine. Public spirits must stay high," you smile automatically because apparently that's a thing now. And hey, maybe the privy is less grim with a forced grin and a whispered motto. Because in this town, anything can become tradition as long as it's shouted with feeling. It's early morning, the fog still curling around the chimneys like bashful ghosts when the bell rings 3 times. Not Oswin's usual rhythm, not Cedric's accidental panic clangs. 3 deliberate, measured rings. You pause mid chew, a mouthful of barley porridge, hanging in suspense. The last time you heard this tone, someone had found a 3-headed chicken, and the town briefly debated whether to worship it. You step into the street just in time to hear, by council summons, all citizens are requested to gather for a special announcement concerning the well and possibly the moon. A murmur rolls across the village. "Oh dear, it's a special session." You groan gently, not because you dislike announcements, but because these gatherings, these rare ceremonial style proclamations, are long, loud, and full of phrases like "heretofore" and "lest we forget." This is when criers go full opera. They stretch their syllables. They summon their inner drama professor. They dust off their most ridiculous hats. Oswin's wearing his feathered one today, the one that might actually be a taxidermied bird. Cedric looks nervous, which is either a good sign or a prophecy of doom. Special sessions are reserved for monumental messages, royal visits, infrastructure changes, mysterious odors, or anything involving celestial bodies and livestock. You remember last year's incident? Let it be proclaimed that due to the strange behavior of cabbages under the blood moon, all brassicas are to be kept in dark storage until morning. No one understood it, but you all complied. The cabbages never spoke of it again. This morning, the square fills slowly. People bring stools. Elders squint. Children bounce. A goat named Julian eats part of the scroll Oswin had left unattended. The bell rings again, one long note, and the crier begins. By consensus of the council and the will of our ancestors who built this village with brick, sweat, and mildly concerning superstitions. Here we go. He launches into the speech. It's everything you expected. References to the moon's reflective properties. Rumors of a frog that glows at dusk. And an upcoming festival to honor still water and the things it sees. What? You glance around. Some people are nodding. One man weeps. A baby hiccups in rhythm with the bell. This is more than a message, it's a pageant. And here's the thing, ceremonial announcements aren't really about facts, they're about vibes. You once heard a whole decree about hay storage delivered in rhyming couplets with interpretive hand gestures. It changed nothing, but people remembered it, and somehow Haystacks got neater that month. Historians still debate whether these elaborate speeches were necessary or just indulgent. Some suggest they served to unify communities. Others suspect criers got bored and wanted to flex. Either way, tone is everything. If a message is delivered with solemnity and a particularly large hat, it must be important. And that's the magic. These sessions feel significant. Even if you walk away confused, you also walk away convinced you've witnessed something. Once, a crier from the next village shouted, "By the tides and the turnips, all dogs shall be honored on the third day after the first thunderclap of spring." Now there's an annual parade with tiny banners and sausages. Because when you ritualize communication, it becomes culture. Cedric steps up now, scroll in hand, visibly shaking. He begins, "Heretofore, in accordance with the season of fog and rotting leaves, the well shall be drained, blessed, and filled anew to discourage whispering." Silence, then polite applause. He continues, "Let this be a time of reflection. Literally, do not look into the well after sundown." Someone coughs nervously. A child whispers, "Why? What happens?" No one answers. You stand there, absorbing it all: the ceremony, the mystery, the implied supernatural consequences of ignoring local plumbing lore. And as Oswin takes the final scroll and declares, "And there shall be a celebration of stillness. No dancing, no stirring of stews, no sweeping, for exactly 1 hour this evening." You nod. You don't get it, but you nod, because you've learned that these rituals matter, not because of their content, but because they are shared. They are the audio glue of your community. The town doesn't have a newspaper or a newsletter or even a communal chalkboard. What it has is shouting, loud, occasionally confusing, often poetic shouting. So you go home. You mark your calendar for Well Blessing Day. You tell your neighbor not to stir their soup. You try to remember if frogs glowing is a good omen or a sign of forbidden pickling. The next morning, when someone asks what happened, you say, "Well, there was talk of the moon, and frogs, and the well, and stillness, so probably taxes." They nod. Sounds right, because that's the final truth. If it's been shouted, it's probably important, even if nobody's sure why. The night air is cool, crisp, a touch of moss and chimney smoke. You're walking home beneath a sky full of stars that look suspiciously judgmental when suddenly, ding, 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 followed by a pause. And then, nothing. You wait. Still nothing. And now you're concerned, because in this town, silence is more suspicious than shouting. You spin around just in time to see Cedric, standing under the old elm tree, holding a scroll, and blinking like someone who just discovered his own name has vowels. He tries again. Ding! Still nothing. A few townsfolk poke their heads out of windows. Finally, Cedric whispers, I I forgot how to start. Oh no." You watch him fumble the scroll, read a few lines, wince, and clear his throat too hard. Then, by order of someone important, uh, the fish are officially confused. He sighs. The scroll slips. A dog barks. You step closer. "Cedric, what's going on?" He looks up. "Oswin's left for the Harvest Council. I'm alone. The scroll got smudged. I panicked." Ah. Welcome to the moment every village dreads, when the message stops. Because when criers falter, when no one bellows the news, the laws, the nonsense, You start to feel the absence, like a missing heartbeat. It's not just the noise, it's the structure, the rhythm of life. Morning proclamations, midday clarifications, evening contradictions. These aren't just town noise, they're timekeepers, social glue, and emotional metronomes. Without them, you feel unanchored. People gather in the square whispering, "Did something happen? Was there a decree? Maybe he's testing us. Maybe this is the message." A woman clutches her shopping basket like it holds state secrets. One man starts sweeping furiously, just in case sweeping has suddenly become illegal. Historians have written about this phenomenon, the anxieties of unannounced days. A handful of towns across the centuries experienced similar lapses. Council criers too ill to shout, scrolls lost to floods, or bells misplaced during an especially enthusiastic cheese fight. In each case, the same thing happened: confusion, collective panic, and spontaneous overcompliance. You remember one tale from your grandmother about a distant hamlet where silence lasted a full day. People voluntarily punished themselves, just in case. One man spent the day apologizing to his own garden. Here and now, Cedric tries again. "Attention! All is probably fine, I think." You gently take the scroll from him. It's soaked. The ink is bleeding like a weepy poet. The only words still legible are fish, council, and regrettably damp. You sigh. He sighs. The dog sighs. "Cedric," you say softly, "you don't need to be Oswin. You just need to say something." He looks at you with that squinty mix of fear and hope. Like, "Improvise?" You nod. He straightens, rings the bell, and with slightly shaky conviction, shouts, "Citizens, while the official message is temporarily unavailable, please remember to stay warm, be kind to geese, and not to panic about fish." The crowd blinks. Then, applause. Tentative, relieved. Someone mutters, "Kinda geese. I can do that." The butcher nods solemnly. "Warm. Yes, good idea." And just like that, the world clicks back into place. Because it's not about the accuracy of the message, it's about the presence of it. The ritual of being told something, anything, with enough volume to believe it matters. You watch Cedric recover. He improvises a second message. Also, lost gloves may be returned to the tannery's barrel. If you find a right hand one with buttons, it's mine. People laugh. A woman waves a glove. For the first time, Cedric looks like he believes he belongs. And the villagers? They disperse, smiling, shoulders lighter. Because even when the message is nonsense, even when it's about soggy fish and glove reunions, it still connects them. You realize something. Standing there beside the elm, the crier doesn't just speak for the village, he speaks it into being. Without the daily declaration, people lose their outline, their edges blur. With it, even if it's silly, uncertain, or soaked, it grounds them. So the next morning, when Cedric rings the bell and confidently proclaims, "Council update. Fish are now slightly less confused. Rain expected. Don't pet strangers' goats." You don't question it. You nod. You adjust your goat petting plans accordingly. And somewhere, deep in your chest, something settles. Because the message is back. And with it, the world continues. A week passes. Cedric's voice, once as trembly as undercooked pudding, now cuts through the morning fog with respectable clarity. He still mixes up syllables now and then. Last Thursday's lard day, instead of bar day, will live in infamy. But there's confidence now. You're in the square when he announces, by decree of the mayor, the annual festival of strings will take place as usual, with ribbons, music, and only minimal enthusiasm required. The crowd chuckles. And just like that, another odd little tradition continues uninterrupted. It makes you think, what happens when criers aren't just messengers, but curators of memory? Because over time, the proclamations pile up, not on paper, not neatly bound in a library, but in the collective headspace of the village, in shouted rituals and odd phrases and rules no one remembers the origins of. You look around, every shop, every cobblestone corner, every goat hitched lamppost bears the echo of some long ago announcement. The blacksmith's door still has a faded sign: no tinkling after twilight, by order of 1187. No one even knows what that means anymore, but no one dares test it. The bakery has a shelf labeled emergency crust zone because Oswin once shouted something about bread rations during a storm that never came. The shelf's still there, just in case. In this world, shouting doesn't just inform, it fossilizes. Historians try to piece it together from fragments. One dusty scroll might say, proclaimed at midday, cows to be counted backward. Another, repeat until the sneeze subsides. You honestly can't tell if half the proclamations were laws or medical advice. And that's the point. These verbal records aren't static. They live in the retelling. You know a child who still refuses to drink milk on Wednesdays, citing a dairy decree from 3 years ago. It was, in fact, an April Fool's proclamation. But once it's been shouted, it sticks. A scholar once visited your village and asked, "What's your town's constitution?" The mayor pointed at Oswin and said, "That guy." They weren't joking, because criers hold more than just scrolls. They hold context. They remember when the goat band started, why Thursday is soup free, why people clap twice before entering the cooper's shop. It had something to do with bees, allegedly. Criers are oral historians by accident, not by choice, just by volume. You once asked Oswin, "Do you write any of it down?" He shrugged. "If I did, it'd be outdated by supper time." That's the trick. Proclamations are impermanent yet eternal. Spoken, then gone, but somehow still shaping how people behave years later. Even Cedric's offhand statements ripple through time. He once muttered, barely above a whisper, "Maybe the moon likes apricots." No decree, no scroll, just a passing thought. Now, the apothecary sells moon apricot elixir for balance. You wish that were a joke. What's more surprising is how little resistance people show. They don't question, who decided this? They ask, was it shouted loudly enough to count? It's like living in a world run by podcast episodes. If every episode ended with, "Now go rearrange your butter according to lunar alignment," and people would do it religiously. In a nearby town, their crier once mispronounced annual vinegar festival as manual finger vessel. To this day, their spring holiday involves strange gloves and deeply confused children. You wonder what outsiders would think, stepping into your village mid-proclamation, all doors to be opened twice, to honor the wind's journey. Shirts must now be tucked or flapped, no in between. Report sightings of suspicious fog to Cedric's mother. She keeps a log. But for you, it all makes sense, not logically perhaps, but rhythmically. It's the music of your daily life. And without criers, you'd have nothing to push against, no anchor to rebel from, no shared myths to roll your eyes at. Even disputes get settled by proclamation memory. That's not what Oswin said last year. Well, I remember it was shouted while he had a cold, so technically invalid. But he rang the bell 3 times. Oh, right. Never mind. And when things change, when a tradition ends or a rule fades, it's not declared over. It just stops being shouted, and slowly people forget. That's the quiet power of criers, not just in what they proclaim, but in what they choose not to. There used to be a daily announcement about cleaning your shoes with pine ash. You haven't heard it in years. And now, no one bothers. Shoes stay muddy, and the village just accepts it. So when Cedric says, "This week, the duck pond shall be closed for renovation and also for emotional healing," you don't laugh, you nod, because someone will paint the bench. Someone will give the ducks snacks. Someone will sit quietly by the water and feel better. And that's how stories become customs, how customs become rules, and how shouted nonsense becomes the scaffolding of civilization. It's just before dusk, and you're watching the sky melt into lavender when Cedric shuffles into the square, bell in hand, scroll under one arm, and what appears to be a loaf of bread tucked under the other. Multitasking. He clears his throat and rings once, softly, a respectful ding. Then, in a tone you barely recognize, low and almost gentle, he declares, "As the sun sets on market week, citizens are reminded to take stock of lost things, found things, and things left in between." You pause. Wait for the punchline, but none comes. Instead, Cedric lowers the scroll and steps off the barrel. No list of regulations, no new festival named after onions, no apocalyptic goat warnings, just a reminder to reflect. And in that moment, it hits you. Sometimes criers didn't just shout instructions, they offered pause. In a world governed by bells and barked commands, this is the rarest of proclamations, the contemplative kind. You've heard of them before. Whispers from other villages, scrolls that don't warn or announce, but simply observe. Historians still debate whether these proclamations had political function or were just the side effect of criers getting poetic. A few call them bell meditations. Others referred to them as crowd hushers. Whatever the name, they carried unexpected weight. You remember one from Oswin years ago. "This evening, may your dreams be free of fish, taxes, and accidental fire." Everyone had laughed, but everyone also went home smiling. You now realize that proclamations don't need urgency to be memorable. Sometimes, the message isn't what changes the village, it's the moment it creates: a hush, a beat, a second of unity in a place where the daily soundtrack is one long, slightly damp shout. And these quiet proclamations, they linger. They become legends. You know people who still talk about the day of the spoon pause. It was late autumn. Oswin simply rang the bell and said, "Let us give thanks to spoons, the silent lifters of broth." No one said a word for 2 whole minutes afterward. Someone cried. Someone hugged a spoon. Don't question it. The impact of these proclamations isn't in logic, it's in shared silence, the kind that follows the bell when everyone instinctively stills, waiting to hear what part of their soul is being acknowledged next. And Cedric seems to be catching on. He rings the bell again, twice slowly, and says, "If you've forgotten something small but important this week, let that be enough. Sometimes the world will carry it for you." The town barely breathes. A dog sits down. A potter lowers her bowl mid spin. Even the pigeons seem unusually composed. This isn't news. It isn't law. It isn't even very clear. But it matters, because when life is measured in shouted fragments, taxes and bread rules and curfews and cow related crises, a moment of verbal gentleness feels like medicine. You've spent years rolling your eyes at criers, groaning at goat alerts, ducking behind barrels when Cedric forgets what volume moderation means. But tonight, you stand a little straighter because this proclamation is for you, not the collective, not the bureaucracy, just you, the tired villager trying your best to make it through a muddy week with dignity and a mostly unbroken roof. Cedric, awkward as ever, fumbles for the last line. And if anyone is still missing a boot, we found one near the turnip sign. And the spell breaks. Laughter, relief, a few claps. One old man whistles appreciatively. But the mood stays soft. You look around and see something rare. Faces turn toward the crier, not with impatience or skepticism, but with warmth. Because criers aren't just noisemakers, they're mood makers. They direct not just the body of the town, but its heart. And in those rare moments, usually unplanned, almost always a bit odd, they lift the village out of obligation and into connection. You remember another one from years ago. Weather is weather. People are people. Try to be kinder than both. It was said in summer. You still think about it in winter. And so, as Cedric climbs down, clearly trying to hide a blush, you make your own silent proclamation. You will stop mocking the criers, at least for today. Because even in a world without newspapers or emails or trending hashtags, these shouted fragments, clumsy, poetic, weird, hold people together. And sometimes the most powerful message is the one that tells you you're not alone. It's late now. The square is empty, save for a sleeping dog and a candle guttering in the window of the baker's loft. The shouting has stopped. No bells, no scrolls, just the kind of hush that drapes itself over cobblestones like a well worn shawl. And yet you wait, because even though nothing more is scheduled, even though Cedric said his last words hours ago, you half expect another proclamation. Some last minute goat warning, a reminder to respect the tavern's broom, an update about a lost mitten with sentimental value. But none comes. And somehow, that silence feels louder than any shout. You wander the edge of the square, passing places where messages once echoed. There's the post where Oswin tied the emergency message goat during winter storms. The wall where Cedric accidentally proclaimed someone's engagement 3 weeks early. They got married anyway, out of sheer momentum. The bench where old Merla always sat, repeating the proclamations to herself like spells. Each corner holds a story, because over time, you've realized that these messages weren't just announcements. They were the heartbeat of the village. Sure, most of them were nonsense. Warnings about fictional floods, decrees about the moral alignment of soup, instructions to oil hinges before solstice, all shouted as if your very soul depended on compliance. But mixed in were the essentials. That harvest was coming, that someone's pig had returned, that the council approved a second bread cart, that moonlight was to be honored in silence tonight, because someone's grandmother had passed and she loved soft skies. The criers, whether they knew it or not, became the collective diary of the town. Not always accurate, definitely not subtle, but unmistakably alive. You remember being younger, standing in this same square, as Oswin declared with dramatic pause, "Hear ye, the village is stronger when its people listen to each other, even if what they hear is mostly about dusty turnips." It didn't make sense until it did, because behind the absurdity, behind the bell induced ear fatigue and scroll mishaps, and Cedric's infamous lisping incident during shoe realignment week, was a simple truth. These messages held you, they shaped you, they reminded you that you were part of something loud, confusing, and beautifully human. And tomorrow, there will be more. Cedric will stumble onto the barrel again. He'll clear his throat, He'll adjust his hat that's still too big. He'll ring the bell and maybe drop it once, and then say something like, "This week's market shall celebrate rain unless it doesn't." You'll nod. You'll probably mutter something sarcastic about goat based economies, but you'll smile and you'll listen because you know now, with the kind of certainty that doesn't come from scrolls or scholars, that to be shouted at is to be remembered, and to hear a message, loud, silly, sacred, or strange, is to be part of a story that is always unfinished, always echoing, always yours. So now the bell is quiet, the scrolls are rolled, the criers have gone to bed, probably still muttering odd phrases in their sleep, like "beware the cheese at dusk" or "don't trust left facing umbrellas." And you're here, breathing slow, letting the echoes fade. Let your mind drift now through the sleepy streets of that village, past the candlelit windows, past the goat nibbling something it absolutely shouldn't, past the echoes of announcements, long since swallowed by time. The messages, absurd as they were, had rhythm, like tides, like breath. They gave the day a beginning, a middle, an end, and in their own strange way, they watched over you. Even now, you can almost hear the soft whisper of an old proclamation echoing in the night air. Let it be known, you did enough today. And so you did. There are no bells left to ring, no scrolls left to read, only stars above turning quietly, and a night that welcomes you, not with fanfare, not with declarations, but with stillness, with space to exhale, to soften, to sleep. You've survived the criers, the chaos, the confusion, and somehow, in the midst of it all, you've found peace. So rest now, traveler of sound and silliness. Let the proclamations fade like dreams into the cobbled corners of your thoughts. Sleep safe, sleep soft, sleep deeply. Tomorrow there may be news, but tonight there is only quiet.